tell me you don't need me. I can understand. I want you. I need you. Please take my hand. Anything you want, anything you need, anything is everything to me. Anything you want, anything you need, anything is everything to me.
Well, what is going on, everybody? Welcome into the Overreaction Sports Podcast, brought to you by the Market Dominator on the Buffalo Rumblings Podcast Network. I'm your host, the voice of the Overreaction Sports Podcast. My name is Joe Miller, and you can find me, as always, on Twitter at Joe Miller Wired. And you might be asking yourself, or maybe you've asked yourself a couple times if you're newer with the show, who is this Market Dominator that this guy keeps talking about? Well, the Market Dominator is my very good friend. He goes by the name John Spascheck, and John is a real estate broker with Keller Williams here in Western New York, but he can help you anywhere that you are in the country. John is consistently ranked in the top 100. He literally just got the award for being in the top 100 about a week and a half, 2 weeks ago. But John is by far and away, hands down, in my opinion, the best real estate broker. And I apologize if I've got fans of this show that listen and you're a real estate broker. I'm sorry if I'm hurting your feelings. I've done some buying and selling of property. And what John does as far as just seeing the process through, not letting anything fall through the cracks, being ahead of the game, driving the other person in the sale. So if you're the seller, driving the buyer and his agent. If you're the buyer, driving the seller and his agent. John just does a fantastic job. If you're looking to buy a home, especially in this market, or sell a home in this market right now, and the market is hot, houses are selling in hours, you want to give John a call if you do not have a broker yet. 716-570-3298. That number again, 716-570-3298. You can reach him on his cell phone. That's his personal cell. You can also find him on his email, yourelitebroker@gmail.com. He is also Bill's Mafia. You can find him on Twitter at yourelitebroker. But as I always say, I am so glad that you are here. I got a great show for you. I got an absolutely fantastic show for you. And if this is the first time that you have ever heard my voice, or if you are a longtime listener, if you've been a part of the Overreaction show since I was independent in 2019, back in October, and you were one of like my first 10 listeners, I'm just excited that you are listening. Don't ever underestimate how much I take pride in, and how honoring it is for me and humbling it is for me to know that you guys are listening to my voice and listening to what I have to say, and that my opinions somehow, for some reason, matter to you. And as always, whether this podcast finds you around a cup of coffee, on the drive to work, at the gym with your AirPods in, or now watching me live on YouTube, let me just one more time say welcome. It's so good to have you. So it is Mother's Day, or I should say it is Mother's Day weekend. It is my hope and sincere prayer that every single one of you made time for not only your moms, if you've still got a mom on this earth, or at least with the mother of your children, in honor. I cannot begin to tell you how important my wife is to me. In 10 days, it'll be mine and my wife's 20-year anniversary. And I know what you're thinking. You're like, Joe, you don't look like you could have been married 20 years. Well, my wife's 9 years younger than me. So figure that one out. But yeah, so 20 years, and she is my rock, and she is my anchor, and she is the most wonderful mother. So happy Mother's Day to my mom. Happy Mother's Day to my stepmom. Happy Mother's Day to my mother-in-law, and very much a happy Mother's Day to my wife, Bethany Miller. I love you so much. Got a great show for you tonight. Got a special guest coming up, author and Buffalo Bills historian. In about 5 minutes, Jeffrey J. Miller will be joining us. He has written a whole lot of books, and probably books that you have on your bookshelf. My guess is if you did not buy these books, my guess is somebody bought them for you and they ended up on your shelf. He has written the Rockpile Report, or Rocking the Rockpile, I'm sorry. He's written Buffalo's Forgotten Champions. He's written Game Changers, the greatest plays in Buffalo Bills history. He's written 100 Things Bills fans should know and do before they die. He's also written a book called Pop Warner, A Life on the Gridiron. We're going to talk about that. And he's got a new book in the works. So stick around for that. In about now 4 minutes ish, somewhere around there, Jeff is going to be joining us. And oh, by the way, he just so happens to be my uncle. So the fact that our last names are both Miller is not a coincidence. And when he pops on, you're gonna be like, hey, you two kind of look alike. And yes, we do look a little bit alike, but it is so good, as I said, to have you guys with me. Jeff will be joining me momentarily. I would be remiss if I did not take literally a minute and a half or 2 minutes to talk about the big announcement that happened on Wednesday night during the Hump Day Hotline. Jay Spence and myself announced that we have a dream and had a dream about a year ago, and we are looking to fulfill that dream. And that dream is to bring to Bills Mafia, all of you, bring to Bills Mafia a live, full-functioning, 24/7, commercial-free radio station. You heard me right. It's going to be called Overreaction Sports Radio. If you're on YouTube, you can see the screen right now. It says coming soon. The website, if you want to learn more about it, it's www.overreactionsports.com. Here's the thing. It is going to be commercial-free. And with that, I would tell you that we don't have any money. So we have a Kickstarter campaign going right now that we're trying to raise. We want to raise about $200,000 to $250,000 to launch. Now, there's not a lot of overhead with this radio station outside of salaries. You can't have full-time employees without paying them a full-time wage. The money we need to raise is for that purpose. Once we raise that money, we will go live. We are wanting to launch September 1st. If you go to www.overreactionsports.com, I've got a bunch of videos there. There's some demo stuff of myself and Jay Spence. We want to make this dream a reality. We want to reach Bills Mafia, unite Bills Mafia around the country and around the world. And with this station, we can do that. So our question is would you do us the favor of partnering with us? So go to www.overreactionsports.com and check it out if you could be so kind. Also, I don't know where you guys stand with this whole Josh Allen thing right now. And by that, what I'm talking about is just frankly, I'm going to victory lap and dunk on every team in the AFC East from now until Josh Allen retires or is no longer a Buffalo Bill. We lived in quarterback purgatory for 20 years. 20 years we were in quarterback purgatory and had to deal with the likes of Tom Brady. And you all know it. I'm not telling you anything that you don't know. But you had better believe, you had better bet your sweet bippy that I plan on dunking on every team or fan of every team in the AFC East from now until Josh Allen's arm falls off, because that's how good it feels. The dude is 24 years old. He's probably about to sign a $500 million contract. He threw for 4,500 yards in a 16-game season. Oh, by the way, he was injured, and 37 TDs. I have no idea what he's going to do this year in a 17-game season. Hopefully he remains healthy. But I would put $50 that says that he's got over 5,000 yards and hits 40 to 45 touchdowns this year. So I don't know where you are, but petty season is on, I guess is what it comes down to. If we're being petty, I'm petty. And it is my plan and my intention on Twitter, if you follow me, just to dunk on everybody that's not a Bills fan until Josh Allen retires. But with that, I want to take the time now to bring in my guest. As I said, his name is Jeffrey J. Miller. He is an author and a Buffalo Bills historian. He is also my uncle. He has authored a whole lot of books, and he has books coming. But without any further ado, Jeff, how you feeling?
I'm feeling good. I see you're feeling petty.
Yeah,
and I couldn't agree with you more.
Caught me right in the middle of the
It is so good to have that position sealed up, barring any unforeseen catastrophes. You know, this guy, even if he doesn't play at this level next year, he's going to be playing at a very good level. But I don't see any reason why he wouldn't be with the receiving core he has and the coaching staff that believes in him. He is the guy, and he's the guy we've been waiting for 20 years. The Kelly Holcombs and the Trent Edwardses and the Thad Lewises and the JP Lossmans, you know, they're history now.
They are history. It's interesting because we consume as Bills Mafia. We consume a lot of national media, sports content, because that's where we get a lot of our what I would say, or what I would call not our affirmation, but that's where we get a lot of just confidence from, because I don't know that we necessarily always get it locally, if that makes sense. There's a great deal of trying to keep us as fans in check locally, and that door kind of busted through a little bit this year, and there was a lot of getting on board with this franchise, which was great this year. But what's interesting even about when you think nationally, a lot of them haven't seen what you've seen. You bring to the table, right, a lot of experience, a lot of football watching, as well as a lot of conversations. And I think it's amazing to me when we sit and we think and we talk about and ask ourselves the question, has Josh Allen hit his ceiling yet? What we saw in 2020, has he even hit his, can he still get better?
Oh, he can get better. And my fear is that even he takes a slight step back, and then of course the national media goes, oh, you see, it was a typical Buffalo story. He had one great year and they overhyped him. But I really don't see that. Stephon Diggs to me is just elite. And you've got Gabriel Davis now, and you've got Cole Beasley. I mean, yeah. He's just got so many weapons that even passes that he threw that weren't completely accurate, these guys were going up and getting. Yeah. They were getting the contested passes. They were getting the ones that might have been out of their reach in previous years. They've got such a great receiving core that it just seems to me that with the confidence and the play calling, they got Dable back. I truly believe he hasn't fully hit his ceiling yet. So
I agree with you 100%. Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, you're watching the Overreaction Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Joe Miller, on the Buffalo Rumblings Podcast Network, brought to you by the Market Dominator. I'm on with my special guest, Jeffrey J. Miller, author. And you can like and subscribe both this podcast, both the YouTube, both Facebook, both, I don't even know, all the different places you can like and subscribe. Jump on the like button. But to that point, an interesting, for those of you that did not catch my conversation with Reed Ferguson, Reed actually said, and Reed went to college at LSU, and he was there with Jarvis Landry and OBJ. And he said when Diggs got to this football team, he saw Diggs making catches that he doesn't think that OBJ and Landry could make, and that his hands were like way better, which is a huge, profound statement to your point about Diggs.
Absolutely. And the thing about Diggs is he might be the best route runner in the NFL. And it's not just running routes, but knowing how to find the seams. It's almost like he's a slot receiver on steroids. He's just, he can get open when he needs to, but he can get deep too. And people say, oh, we don't have a burner, but Diggs can get deep. He's just got it going on. This guy, he's one of the top 2 or 3 in the NFL. After maybe Hopkins and maybe OBJ. I don't know if I don't put him up there, but
Bills Mafia was a little disillusioned for last year, and I was calling it out in 2019 because coming into the 2020 season, there was very much a conversation that that the Bills kind of had their number one wide receiver, or they had it locked up. And it was before we had gotten Diggs, and all of a sudden my brain is escaping me. In the chat, who was the receiver that we had that caught the one pass against the Jaguars where Allen was about to get tackled? I can't think of his name. Yes, Robert Foster. I had the Robert, didn't have the last name, but there was a lot of Bills fans that were like, I believe that Robert Foster is the number one wide receiver. And it's funny because Bills Mafia has always been very much underdog related. Like, we love the underdog because we Buffalonians, Western New Yorkers, we are the consummate underdogs in this country. Like, you tell us we can't, we'll show you we can. We live in the worst conditions, or some of the worst conditions, and we hold our chins up high. This is the city of good neighbors. And I told Bills Mafia for a long time, he is not a number one, and what Josh Allen needs is the number one. And we probably haven't had a number one, a true number one, since Eric Moulds. Stevie Johnson was great. I love Stevie, but
he wasn't a true number one. No.
Correct. Did you see that? Were you in that same camp of like understanding that Josh Allen needed a true number one wide receiver? Or were you kind of like, no, we can make it work with these guys?
No, I don't think that was the priority, because I think John Brown was really good, and Cole Beasley was really good. They needed somebody else besides those two. But I didn't think they were going to go out and get a guy like Diggs. And when they did, I mean, it was just exhilarating. It's almost like the discovery this year that we had with, this epiphany. Like, Josh Allen is an elite quarterback. We have an elite quarterback. We have a stud receiver. we have studs at two positions that we've never had since Kelly and Reed were here.
Kelly and Reed, that's right.
That's just you don't have that. I mean, Eric Moles was fantastic, but he played with 9 or 10 different starting quarterbacks.
Yeah.
We've got it locked down. So I mean Foster was just but but again, that's the tendency of we as Bills fans to put our faith in these guys who are underdogs. There was a reason why people believe that Nathan Peterman could be a starting quarterback in the NFL. And he looked great in preseason, and I had faith that he could at least play.
Right.
Yeah. That's what it comes down to. We want to believe in these guys.
The one that always sticks out to me is John DeGiorgio. My, oh my, the Buffalo Bills message board arguments that I had with people about John DeGiorgio being a great linebacker. And I'm like, this guy's awful and he's undersized. Can we stop with the John DeGiorgio talk? Anyways, transitioning off of that. And for everybody that's listening live right now, we're going to give you the opportunity to ask Jeff some questions if you have them, but let's transition. So let's do this for the audience, because I know it's even in the comment section right now, and I think you can view the comments a little bit. The majority of people listening to this podcast, listening to this show, either probably have your book or one of your books, or at least picked it up at Barnes and Nobles and been like, hey, what's this about? Right? Because we're Bills fans and we want to consume everything we can. So tell us about yourself and tell us about some of the books that you've authored. Right?
Well,
good luck with that.
Being a football fan is baked into our DNA, Joe, as you know.
Yep.
We come from that lineage where it starts with my father, your grandfather, and he took me to my first Bills game in 1971 at the old Rockpile, and I saw O.J. Simpson that day, and to this day I still believe he's the greatest player the Bills ever had. But that's another story.
You digress.
At that point, I was already a Bills fan by then because I was buying football cards and collecting, but going to my first game just sealed the deal. Mm-hmm. And and I went to a few more games early on, and then when Rich Stadium came around, I got to see O.J. Simpson on Monday Night Football go over 1,000 yards halfway through the 1973 season, which was unbelievable. Monday Night Football. Mm-hmm. So growing up, I always wanted to write. I always wanted to be a writer. I didn't want to be necessarily be a sports writer or a football writer, but I always wanted to write. So I grew up writing short stories, poems, songs, newspaper articles, whatever. And I growing up in a small town called Lime Lake. I thought, a good way to break into writing and kind of establish myself is write a little local history book. So I wrote a local history book about Lime Lake, and it did pretty well, and people liked it. People around town liked it a lot. So I was going to write another book, and I was going to actually kind of bring my small town into the Civil War. I was going to write a Civil War book, and at this point, I'm still a huge Bills fan, but I just being a sports writer never dawned on me. And then one day I was at the library. I was going to do some research on the Civil War, and all the microfilm machines were filled up, so I had to wait. And while I was waiting, I started looking through some old scrapbooks that were sitting there, and I found this picture of the Buffalo's first NFL team from 1920, the Buffalo All-Americans. It's like, and I'm a huge football fan. I had heard that we had a team before, but I never saw a picture of them. So, wow, this is really cool. And then a couple days later, I was reading a newspaper article in the Buffalo News, and they were actually enshrining a guy named Jim Alinger into the Buffalo Sports Hall of Fame, who was 99 years old and been a member of this team. Wow. I thought, this is really weird. All of a sudden, these two things are happening at once.
Right.
So at that time, I thought, maybe I'll write an article about this just to kind of, get my feet wet in football. And so I called the guy up, and I interviewed him, and I wrote an article for the Professional Football Researchers Association. And from that point on, I was like, well, there's a book in this, I think. And so then I wrote the book about that football team. And that's kind of how I got established in writing about Buffalo football and football in general. And while I was doing that, I got to know people down at the Bills organization, because I was going down to the stadium and actually doing my research. So I got to know some people down there, and just one thing led to another.
That's awesome. Yeah, football history. I've mentioned it many times on this podcast about sitting next to Grandpa on the couch and watching Joe Cribbs play football, and Grandma asked him, whenever Joe Cribbs would rip off an 18-yarder, Grandma then saying, "Why don't they run that play every time?" And Grandpa getting mad because Grandpa was the football coach, and Grandpa was like, "You can't run the same play every time, Dorothy," which was always funny. So I have vivid memories of being like 6, 7 years old, and like that was the conversation on the couch, which is awesome. But of the books that you've authored, which one? And you've authored a bunch. Is there one that's your favorite, or the one that you're most proud of?
Well, I guess there are two that really, three that. Well, I'm really proud of Game Changers because I was able to work with Marv Levy on that one. Working with, the Hall of Fame coach, it's a chance of a lifetime. And I approached my publisher about doing a book in the series that they were doing, and when I did, they wrote back and they said, "Well, we'd love to have you do this, but would you be okay with doing it with Marv Levy because we have him on contract to do a book?"
Would you be okay? No. The answer's no.
So, I said yes, and then like a day later, I come home from work and I click my answering machine, which we had in those days, and there's his voice.
We need to stop because you've used the word library and answering machine now, and I promise you, there's some people listening to this that don't know what a library is and don't know what an answering machine is.
Absolutely. So I click on it and I'm listening, and then all of a sudden I hear, "Hello, Jeff. This is Marv Levy. I guess we're doing a book together. Here's my number. Give me a call and we can talk." He's got that kind of John Wayne-ish kind of slow talk. And that was a thrill. That was probably my biggest thrill in writing. But if I had to pick my favorite book, Rocking the Rockpile gave me a chance to go back and talk to all these guys that I grew up worshiping is a strong word, but I grew up watching the AFL and a lot of these guys that played in those days. So I got to go back and talk to Jack Kemp and Pete Gogolak and Lou Saban and Ralph Wilson and Butch Bird and Albert Dubenion and all these guys that I grew up just watching and talking to them on the phone. And in some cases, I was going, to Starbucks and having a cup of coffee with one of these guys. Or one time, I didn't finish my interview with Jack Kemp on the phone because he was going on holiday. And he says, "I'll call you when I get to Vail," because he was going there with his family. And a couple days later, he calls me on the phone, and I'm like talking to Jack Kemp. He's calling me. So, getting to tell that story and talking to those guys was great. But what was really thrilling was talking to a lot of the guys that were like backups on that team, because they're the ones who didn't have an agenda. They're the ones who didn't they didn't have have to like glorify themselves. They were telling you the truth.
Right.
If somebody was a jerk on the team, you were getting the story from them. And so it was just kind of neat to just kind of put that whole thing together. And I really enjoyed that book.
That's cool. That actually is the follow-up question that I think I would have to that is, of the former Bills players you've interviewed, and I'm guessing it's going to come from probably that pool, but I could be wrong. Is there a favorite interview that you've got?
Yeah. Most of them would come from that. Jack Kemp, obviously, because of the magnitude of his name. He's so famous. I mean, this guy was almost vice president and probably could have been president. That was a big thrill for me. But the one guy that stood out, and a lot of people don't know who he is, but I had his card tacked on my wall, and my sister Nancy had a crush on him. So Paul Costa, who was a tight end with the Bills, he later played tackle, and he played into the 70s. But interviewing Paul Costa was really cool because it was like, this guy, like having this guy on my wall, like they just don't seem like they're attainable or accessible. And when you finally, and most of these guys, their numbers were in the phone book. In those days, there was phone books, and there was no internet. It was just the beginning of the internet. So I was looking guys up in the phone book.
That's 3.
Billy Shaw. Billy Shaw was a Hall of Famer. And I called him up on the phone. I looked his number up in the telephone book. Or in the white pages. It's just incredible that, that's the way these guys were. They were regular guys. Yeah. So, those guys, were really cool. there were a couple guys who were not so much fun, but Al B. Miller was great because like he invited me over to his house, and in his garage he had a bar and like a Bill shrine, all these pictures. And his brother-in-law was Dick Cunningham, and he was a former Bill, and he came over, and we sat around and we were drinking all night long, telling stories, and I heard all the dirt, and it was great. And so that's the kind of stuff that you really get into.
Yeah. So the question that I have to ask, and I've never asked you this before, and obviously we're family, so we've been around each other a lot.
Mhm.
Inside of all this research, did you get the opportunity? Did you even try to interview O.J. Simpson?
No, and I probably could have. And here's the story. When I was writing this book, we have a mutual friend who is a lawyer who has a cottage at the lake, at Lime Lake, where
Familiar. Yep.
And he's very well connected in the Republican politics in Erie County, and knows a lot of people, because he does international law as well.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was writing the book, he said, "Well, he knows Jack Kemp extremely well," and he says, "Did you talk to Jack?" And I said, "Yeah, I talked to Jack. He was great." And he goes, "Yeah, what about OJ?" And I said, "No, I think it would be kind of difficult to talk to OJ right now because he's in the pokey." And he goes, "You want to talk to OJ?" I said, "I'd love to." He goes, "I can arrange it." And I said, "Excuse me?" He goes, "Seriously, if you want to talk to OJ, I can arrange it for you."
Wow.
And I said, "Listen, as much as I would love to, and I think it would be great, I think it would also be a detraction from this book. I think there would be a lot of people that would come out and maybe not protest this book, but would just be they would really degrade it because of my inclusion of this guy who's accused of this heinous crime."
Right.
So maybe I could have, but I didn't think it was a good idea.
Yeah,
I would have loved to.
That's fair. I just had to ask the question because it just popped into my head, and I was like, I wonder if he's ever. Yeah. So anyway, ladies and gentlemen, you are watching and listening to the Overreaction Sports Podcast on the Buffalo Rumblings Podcast Network. My name is Joe Miller. I'm the host of the Overreaction Sports Podcast, brought to you by the Market Dominator, here with my special guest, Jeffrey J. Miller, author and Bills historian. Whatever platform you're watching on, like it, subscribe it, do your thing. That way we can get our metrics up. But turning that corner as far as like just continuing to talk about just the players and stuff like that, you're getting all this dirt, right? You're having these conversations. You're living the dream. You're finding to have an opportunity. I'm friends with John Fina.
Yeah,
which is unbelievable. Like a year and a half ago, if somebody said to me, "You're going to be friends with John Fina," I'd be like, "Nah, I don't think so." Like, and like the approachability that these guys give you, and the candor and the candidness and the openness that they have to, and their willingness to, generally speaking, answer questions without disparagement. They'd never want to disparage anything, which I love that about their integrity and ethics.
Yes.
But as into your deep dives in Buffalo Bills history, what was the most surprising thing, and it can be funny or whatever, most surprising thing you discovered just about that team or these teams?
I got a chance to talk to Daryl Talley, and he was pretty open about why the Bills lost that first Super Bowl. You heard the rumors, and he verified it. They did not take it seriously enough, and he knew it.
Yeah.
And it's his biggest regret, in life, and God, Daryl Talley's a warrior, and to see someone like Daryl Talley be denied a Super Bowl because they just didn't take it seriously enough. It's kind of shocking for him to admit. You would think that these guys would be so focused.
Right.
They just blew out the Raiders 51-3.
Yeah,
this was a machine.
It was Rocky versus Clubber Lang in the first go around when he, like, all the lights and all the media, and he was like, it was more photo ops than it was actual real boxing.
Absolutely. Yeah. And Bill Parcells was brilliant, and the Bills didn't make the adjustments they needed to. And Talley even said, there was one play where I can't remember it was Ingram. I can't remember who the receiver was, but he caught the ball, and all they had to do was stop him and force a punt. And Talley had said, "I missed a tackle," and the guy went down 10 yards downfield, got the first down. So to hear that kind of honesty,
right?
I love that. Scott Norwood was another one that really broke down and talked about how it felt, what he went through, and and watching, I've done a lot of book signings with Scott, and watching him, the integrity and the fortitude that this man has.
Mhm.
When people come up to him with a football or a helmet or a picture and say, "Would you mind signing wide right on it?" I mean,
Wow.
could you imagine the biggest screw up you had in your life, or the biggest mistake, or the biggest thing that people hold against you, and people are trying to make light of it and get you to do this and relive it all the time? I mean, so, hearing that kind of honesty to me is really the big thing. I love hearing the funny stories, but when people, when they really open up to you, and you feel like you've bridged a gap, and you've kind of earned their trust and respect, that's important.
My heart just broke for Scott Norwood.
Yeah.
I couldn't imagine somebody asking me, like, "Hey, could you autograph your biggest failure? Like, could you autograph that for me? Your biggest failure?"
Yeah, they're coming up with the picture of the kick, and they're asking him to sign. "Would you mind signing wide right, Scott Norwood?" Wow. Like Bill Buckner in Game 6 of the World Series in '86.
Right.
Would you mind signing? Missed it.
That's rough. That's really rough. It's so, the conversations are so compelling to me.
Mhm.
And what's funny about it is, as much as Bills fans, and I believe that Bills Mafia is the greatest fan base in the country.
Oh, I do too.
From a football perspective, from a knowledge perspective, but it's still funny to me how many people don't realize that we do have a championship, and not only do we have one, we have two.
Mhm.
And the AFL, while it was not the NFL that we know today, it was still a legitimate league. Are you still surprised when you find out people don't know that the Bills were AFL champions twice?
Yeah, that surprises me, but it also surprises me when I talk to NFL hardliners who say, well, the AFL still wasn't legit. And I think by 64, 65, when the Bills were winning their championships, they were on par. As a matter of fact, I think in 1964, when the Cleveland Browns won the NFL championship, the Bills had a decent chance of beating them if they would have played. Now, I'm not saying they would have, but I think they had a really decent chance. The next year, 65 against the Packers, probably not. But that 64 team was a juggernaut, and the Browns and the Bills were very well matched. You had Jim Brown up against Cookie Gilchrist. You had Paul Warfield up against Albert DeBenyon. You had Garrett Collins against Glenn Basson. You had Frank Ryan, a highly intellectual quarterback who has a doctorate in mathematics, up against Jack Kemp. Two highly intellectual quarterbacks, and two really good defenses. And the Bills probably get the edge on defense. It would have been a really good game.
Yeah, and it's interesting because a lot of Bills fans also don't know that Ralph Wilson used to be a former co-owner of the Detroit Lions.
Yes.
The Bills' original colors upon being founded were silver and blue, which is interesting.
Correct.
But also speak to, if you can, the commitment level that Ralph Wilson had to making the AFL a success, which meant shelling out hundreds of thousands of dollars of his own money to make sure that franchises wouldn't fold. Talk about, if you can, real quick, just Ralph and his commitment to this league and to making it be a success.
Well, it's funny you'd mention that, because I was talking to another Bills historian who I'm actually co-writing a book with right now, and we'll get into later. But his name's Greg Trainer. But we were talking about this the other day, and he's actually working on a biography of Ralph now, and he discovered that when Ralph loaned Al Davis money, or the Raiders money, to keep them afloat in, I don't know if it was 63 or 64, the Raiders would have gone under. But he loaned them money in it that actually made him the majority owner of that team until the team went into the NFL. And, I don't know all the details, and I'm going to save that for Greg's book, but, I didn't know that. I knew that he had loaned them $300,000 or $400,000,
which back then, 65, if the natural rate of inflation is double every 15 years, the time value of money. So what's that? 65, 15 years. How many 30s is that? 65, 95. So it's 2 30s, 4. So 300 times 2 times 2 times 2. It's millions.
Well, not to mention the fact that the value of a franchise has just expanded, by nature as well. So
but he loaned them millions. In today's dollars, he loaned them millions and millions of dollars.
Millions, right?
Yeah.
And so Ralph was obviously in it for the long haul. And he also loaned money to Billy Sullivan, who was the owner of the Boston Patriots at that time. So he had stock in 3 different teams in the NFL. But he saw the long term. He knew that if we got that TV contract, the NFL was eventually going to have to take us in, and
Right.
that's when the money would start rolling. And so he was a man of great vision, and he was very wise.
Yeah, for sure. Somebody, Richard Rush just mentioned in the chat that Al Davis died owing Ralph Wilson money. Is that true?
That I don't know. Greg would probably know that. I don't know that, but it wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah, that would be interesting. Just knowing what even when Al Davis died, what the teams were worth. I mean, they were worth $1 billion by that point in time. There was revenue there. There was money there. I can't imagine.
Yeah.
It must have gotten to the point where Ralph, who was at that point worth, obviously $1 billion himself, probably was like, who cares? I'm not. Or it was just, who knows? Maybe he died having, like you said, ownership in the team. That book will be interesting when it comes out because it sounds like there's a bunch of information there that maybe a lot of us don't have any clue about. To your point, in your research, and this is for me. I put this question in here for me because I have zero history outside of highlights of O.J. Simpson, and I have even less history of Cookie Gilchrist, and all I hear about, looky, here comes Cookie. Like how good Cookie was. I've not seen hardly any highlights. I know nothing. The only thing I know about Cookie and Ralph and the Bills is that Cookie had a shortened career, and I know this from you and Dad. And it's because Ralph and Cookie didn't get along, so Cookie split. So what happened there?
Well, Cookie was, we talk about today's athlete, being an individual and being, not wanting to be controlled by management and all that. That was Cookie Gilchrist. He was a man, he was a very proud man. And, in that day and age, African-American athletes were expected to toe the line.
Right.
That's the way it was. Right. I don't think I'm saying anything that people don't know. No. That's just they were just expected to, we're paying you, keep your mouth shut. And all athletes were really, not just African Americans, but, them in general, because, the quarterbacks were white, the coaches were white, the owners were white, the general manager was white, everybody was white. And like James Harris said himself, he said, when I came to the Bills, you saw running backs all over the place, African American. You saw cornerbacks all over the place, African Americans. So wide receivers, but you didn't see any black quarterbacks, and so the opportunities and the respect that those people were getting at the time was low. Cookie Gilchrist was probably the best player in the league for those 3 years he was in Buffalo, and he always wanted more money. He wasn't going to get any more than what Ralph was willing to give him.
Sure.
And, the final straw was when he walked off the field in a game in 1964. He walked off the game against Boston. He came back later in the game, but he walked off the field because he felt he wasn't getting the ball enough. And that was enough for Lou Saban to suspend him. Eventually brought him back. But, that was pretty much the straw that broke the camel's back. Cookie... Part of the problem with Cookie in terms of like his legacy is that he didn't start playing American football until he was 28 years old. He played in Canada for the first 8 or 9 years of his career. So he comes to Buffalo in 1962. He's already a 28-year-old rookie or whatever.
Right.
So he plays in 62, 63, 64. He's now a 30-year-old man.
Right.
So he's no spring chicken. So, the Bills trade him to Denver for Billy Joe, and he goes to Denver and he has one more really good year, and that's pretty much it. So he has really 4 good years of American football. People don't realize this, though, that Cookie Gilchrist was actually recruited by Paul Brown for the Cleveland Browns, and had he gone to the Browns and stayed, but he was recruited out of high school, and the NFL didn't allow it to happen, and that's why Cookie had to go to Canada. Mm-hmm. But if he had stayed there, Jim Brown might not have been drafted, and if he had, it would have been Cookie Gilchrist and Jim Brown in the same backfield.
Wow,
I know that's incredible to think about. With Cookie, Cookie spent the rest of his days, an unhappy man, feeling he got screwed, and trying to find ways to make money. And and in some ways he got screwed, but in other ways, I mean, he signed a contract and he was expected to play the game.
Sure.
And, he's a proud man.
By and large, that hasn't changed much. By and large, I mean, they sign contracts and they're expected to play. And there are suspensions that loom and things that happen if they don't report, if they don't show up, if they're not happy with their contracts and things like that. So it not as much has changed. They do have a voice now. All of the players have a voice now, but it's a little bit different. But I want to lean back into what you said just about that era. Because Ralph Wilson for a long time, and the Bills in general, specifically after the Tyrod move, and I don't want to run this down the racism track,
No.
but the Bills have been accused of being a racist franchise. And the reality is the Buffalo Bills had one of the first black quarterbacks in the NFL. And oh, by the way, one of the last years that Tyrod was here, the Bills rostered 3 black quarterbacks. Every quarterback on the team was black. Tyrod, EJ, and
Cardale Jones.
Cardale Jones from OSU. That's right. And a lot of people don't want to see it, right? They don't want to see it. Do you have any stories, any conversations about that first? I don't know his name. I'm not huge into Bills history back then, but do you have any do you know anything about those stories as far as that time?
No, the Bills are the first team to draft a quarterback for the specific purposes of having him play quarterback, and that was James Harris.
Gotcha.
A lot of times quarterbacks got drafted and they said, well, we're going to make you a wide receiver or a safety or something. And, James Harris played the position. He wasn't great, but he was decent, but he wasn't a great quarterback. But I don't think that playing on a team that was not very good and had O.J. Simpson in the backfield was conducive to his development.
Sure.
He goes to Los Angeles and he turns into a really good quarterback at that point. So not necessarily his fault, but I agree with you when it comes to, I've heard that the Bills are a racist organization. I don't see it. I really don't. And that's to your point, having those 3 quarterbacks on the roster at the same time. I think that speaks volumes that they were willing to do that. That if they thought that they were doing it for show, it was a pretty stupid thing to do. They thought they had 3 really good quarterbacks.
What's amazing
about Tyrod was a really good quarterback. He wasn't Josh Allen, but he was a really good quarterback.
Tyrod, Bills Mafia loves Tyrod. Nobody hates Tyrod Taylor. And nobody hates EJ Manuel. And I had a lot of hope for Cardale. I lived in Columbus for 13 years and I watched Cardale play at OSU. And when the Bills drafted him, I was like, yes. I was excited that one of these 3 guys, one of them has to work, has to pan out. They didn't. And hindsight is 2020 in the sense of as much as I didn't want Josh Allen, I wanted Josh Rosen because I didn't want the 3-year project. I was wrong, and I'm really glad I was, because Josh Allen is just, and we talked about it at the top of the show, he's just otherworld as far as that goes. But it's a great segue. Where do you think Josh Allen is going to rank from that standpoint as a Buffalo Bills quarterback when his career is over? Is the game has changed so much, and that's what's hard. And I've had a lot of conversations with Jay Spence, who's one of my best friends, partner for the radio station. Yeah. And he feels like for him, there's been a lot of he's been what's the word? He's been tired of the constant comparison between this Bills team and the 90s Bills team. And the reason the comparison is happening is because this team is now winning. And this is the first time the team has won since that time. And I said, it's never going to, the comparison is not going to stop until this Bills team wins a Super Bowl. They can't go to the championship and lose, or the Super Bowl and lose. They have to win. But you've lived through the comparison between the AFL teams that won to the Ferguson years, right? And then the Ferguson years were kind of mediocre, but the AFL championship years to the 90s teams. So you're kind of reliving this. History repeats itself. So AFL, 20-something years, 90s teams, 20-something years, this current team. There was a lot in there. I apologize, but when you think
look back at the '60s team, you look at quarterbacks in that era. Jack Kemp threw more, in some seasons twice as many interceptions as he threw touchdowns.
Right.
Okay, but he also scored more touchdowns on the ground than any other quarterback in Bills history. Mm-hmm. George Blanda is another one who threw more interceptions than touchdowns. Joe Namath would throw 5 or 6 touchdowns a game.
Right.
So it was fairly common in those days for quarterbacks to have high numbers of interceptions. So comparing Josh Allen to Jack Kemp is somewhat unfair.
Right.
Jack Kemp was a leader. Jack Kemp, he's the kind of guy there was always that LaMonica Kemp controversy, but the bottom line is Kemp was a winner, and he said, "Get on my back, and we're going to win," and they did.
Jim was like that.
That was Jim Kelly, and Jim Kelly was, he was kind of like, we had Joe Ferguson. Joe was a really good quarterback, but he was not. He was playing in an era with Terry Bradshaw, Dan Fouts, Bob Greasy. These guys are Hall of Famers. He's got, he just he wasn't in their league.
Right.
You get to Jim Kelly, and now you're talking about elite. Now you're talking he's one of the top 2 or 3 quarterbacks in the NFL while he's playing.
Yes.
And so it's the argument's going to come down to Josh and Jim.
Right.
And like we were talking about last week, or I texted you that if Josh retired tomorrow or something happened, he's not in the Hall of Fame. He's only played 3 seasons. He had one really spectacular year. Jim had 5 or 6 spectacular years, 4 Super Bowls, etc.
And the gamblers.
So Jim's in the Hall of Fame.
And the gambler stuff. You can't discount the gamblers' years.
Right. Absolutely.
Right.
So he's in the Hall of Fame. So, but a Super Bowl or an MVP year, that changes everything.
Right.
I think year 4, if he goes to the Super Bowl or he makes MVP, he's now neck and neck with Jim Kelly. If he wins the Super Bowl,
right,
he might be the guy you rank number 1 all time.
Yeah, for sure. It's hard to, and it's funny because the game has changed so much. That it's so different now than what it was when Kemp played. I mean, the amount of interceptions these guys throw now versus what they threw back then, and the game is 100 times more complex. I remember having a conversation with a coach, and I don't remember who it was, but he was telling me, it might have been a player, and he was telling me when a quarterback calls a play in the huddle, it's almost like this might be the play. It's not even necessarily the play. This might be the play.
Mm-hmm.
And then they walk to the line of scrimmage, and then there's a check made. Yep. And the check is made based off of what the defense is showing them. And the defense, by the way, can change in the middle of it. And not only that, but the quarterback looks at the defense, and he's got a primary, and he's making an assumption based off of the coverage of what the wide receiver should run. Mm-hmm. The wide receiver, on the other hand, without talking to the quarterback, has to look at the defensive coverage and make the same guess. Yeah. I'm going to run this route. And they're all timing anticipation throws. The complexity of NFL offenses right now is unreal. It's unbelievable.
And how many interceptions did Aaron Rodgers throw last year? 4?
It wasn't many.
Yeah, and think about that.
I think, did Allen throw 8 or 12 or 14? It wasn't many as well. Like it was.
Patrick Mahomes threw what, 9? 8, 9, something like that?
It's absolutely insane. So it's not fair to kind of compare the two. No. But I think there's something to talk about from the leadership standpoint. There is a very similar part to all 3 of these guys. And I pick on Trent Edwards all the time because Trent Edwards is the guy that's like, I just like to be a quiet leader and let my plays show. And that doesn't work. It just doesn't work. You can't. Aaron Rodgers might be the closest guy to a quiet leader. And it's probably good because when he opens his mouth, he says stupid stuff and tries to blow the team up or doesn't talk to his parents. Like for him being quiet works for him, but his dominance outweighs his quietness. His leadership does work, but by and large, that does not work. You have to be a vocal, rally the team, put the team on your back, take the blame, do all the things. And Kemp had it, Kelly had it, Allen has it, and this team loves him, which is amazing.
There was one other guy that I think had it, but I don't like the word screwed, but Doug Flutie had it.
Sure.
And he, given, I think if he had the real opportunity, there could have been some success here. If the Bills would have beat the Titans in that game,
right?
I mean, their path to the Super Bowl was clear,
pretty easy.
And I like Johnson, and I admit, I like Johnson. I like the way he looked. I like the way he threw, and
I was on the wrong
now
side.
Looking back, boy, was I wrong.
I was on the wrong side of that argument. I was on the wrong side. I was on the Johnson side.
And but Doug Flutie, I think, is the one guy in that whole, that 40 years in the desert. That Doug Flutie was the one guy. We had Drew Bledsoe. He was pretty good, but he didn't really, And then we had J.P. Lossman, number 1. He was a big guy, and then we had E.J. Manuel, and then we picking these guys high, but Doug Flutie really, I think he had it. and we just didn't know it.
Bledsoe is an interesting conversation because I did a pod last year with Bruce Nolan. And I don't know that you're overly familiar with the pod guys, but Bruce is incredibly smart. He's also on the Rumblings Network and a student of the game and very, very, very. He's premier. He's right there with all of the best as far as just breaking down Bill's stuff to a scientific level. And one of the things that he said to me last year was that Allen, because I questioned him on Allen's lack of in 2019 anticipation throws, because for me, the number one sign of a true NFL elite quarterback is throwing with anticipation. Now, I don't want a quarterback that's throwing with anticipation like Phillip Rivers, where his arm is not strong and he has to throw the ball 3 seconds before the wide receiver breaks. But I want the ball to get there on the break. That's something I think you taught me. Like you and I were out in the circle at Lime Lake throwing footballs, and you taught me about timing patterns and stuff like that. But Bruce said that Allen's arm strength allows him to throw balls past defenders before they even realize the ball's coming. Bledsoe had that.
Yeah.
Like he relied on his arm strength to get the ball past the defender before the receiver was, before the defender could get there. The problem was he was completely immobile and he would lock on. That dude would lock on a wide receiver and it was all downhill from there. Once he got locked on, it was bad news. Allen went through that phase and has progressed past it. Obviously, he's had the mobility, but Allen is legitimately a full field reading quarterback going through all of his progressions, unless his read tells him not to, which sometimes that happens. But by and large, he has just progressed way beyond Bledsoe. I loved Bledsoe. I remember the day he came to town. I remember being like, it was just what a day that was. Oh my gosh, we've got Drew Bledsoe. We've got a real quarterback. And a couple of years there were great, and then it just went downhill from there. But that's
I've heard some of the national guys like Nick Wright. They don't like Josh Allen. They adored Patrick Mahomes, but look at the skill sets.
Well, Nick Wright
How different are they?
Nick Wright is a Chiefs fan, first of all.
Exactly.
He's a Chiefs fan.
But he loves Mahomes over Allen.
Right.
What's the difference?
Right.
Really, Allen can make every throw Mahomes can make.
Yeah. There's one year of tenure in the NFL of playing. He's got 2, but 1 year of playing tenure in the NFL. I think he's got 1 extra year, maybe not. But no, all the off-platform stuff, arm strength stuff, mobility stuff. Mahomes is just another world. They're different players for sure.
I think he's the best quarterback in the league right now.
Oh, for sure, hands down.
I think Tom Brady is the greatest, but he's not Tom Brady 10 years ago. He's still a great quarterback, but he's not going to do what Mahomes is going to do.
For sure. So let's do this, ladies and gentlemen. You are watching and listening to the Overreaction Sports Podcast on the Buffalo Rumblings Podcast Network. Sitting here with my guest, Jeffrey J. Miller, author and Buffalo Bills historian. If you've got questions in the comments, if you've got questions for Jeff, and they can pertain to any era of Buffalo Bills, and probably going all the way back to the Buffalo All-Americans. I have a jersey that a friend from college gave me in 1997 that's a throwback hoodie or throwback sweater before throwbacks were a thing, which is the Buffalo Bisons from the All-American Football League. And you have been bugging me to get that hoodie or that sweatshirt for me forever. But I still have it, still wear it. Still one of my favorites. It's hanging in my closet. It's falling apart, unfortunately. But if you have any questions for Jeff, feel free to send them in right now. Before we get to those questions, you've got a new book you're working on. Tell us about the book.
Well, actually, I have 2. The new book is called Relics: The History of the Buffalo Bills Through Objects and Memorabilia, and I'm writing it with my friend Greg Tranter, who is a well-known Bills historian. He's actually the owner of the largest collection of Bills memorabilia on the planet. He donated his entire collection to the Buffalo History Museum, and it's now on exhibit there. It's called Icons, and he knows everything. And so he approached me about doing a book based primarily on his collection. We included some other items in the book that we thought were pertinent, but the book contains about 72 or 73 items that are collectible or that are important in Bills history that string it together from the very beginning all the way up to modern times. So, we include an AFL jersey and a AFL football, and we tell the story behind it, or the player who used it or wore it, or the manufacturer who made it, and maybe the history behind the company. And then we tell, it goes right up through, an O.J. Simpson jersey, the, Flutie Flakes and the Whammy Weenie and, bobblehead dolls and everything. So we also included, we have Ed Rakowski's championship ring from the AFL, and we have a lot of really cool items that, Lou Picone recorded a record and a Christmas record. It wasn't a Christmas. He recorded two. One was a Christmas record, but he recorded a record called "Ain't Nobody Gonna Buffalo My Bills." So we got a copy of the record, and I actually interviewed Lou to get quotes about the record, and I tell the story about how the record was recorded, and how he went into the studio, and and all this stuff, and who was on it, and just the background of this stuff, and it was kind of cool for me because you're finding out stuff that I didn't know about, what's the story behind Flutie Flakes? Who manufactured them, and what same company that's manufacturing Josh's Jacks right now. So
right.
It's a really different concept. So rather than telling the story about OJ's 2,000-yard season or Jim Kelly's not wanting to come to the Buffalo Bills or whatever, we're telling a story about through these objects and how they pertain to whether it's the '64 championship or OJ's 2,000 yards or whatever, some great player. We go right up to Tre'Davious White and his collection of clothing that has the Tre'Davious White Goalie Academy logo on it. So and it's just a different idea, and I think it really strings the entire history together, not just the '60s or not just the Super Bowl years, but the whole thing.
Gotcha. And what about the other book?
The other book that's coming out is a remake of my book, 100 Things Bills Fans Should Know and Do Before They Die. The publisher asked me to revise it based on the successes the Bills have had. Now, normally what's been happening is they've been revising them as teams win Super Bowls or Stanley Cup championships, because this is a whole series that they did back in the early 2010s. But they said, well, no, we think that they've done really well, and we think now's the time. I think that they're anticipating the Bills are going to have a really good year this year.
Oh, yeah.
And they want to beat the rush.
Get in front of it.
So they asked me to write several new chapters for it. So we kept most of it, but I added 7 new chapters, and I updated all the other information. I mean, when I wrote it, the Bills were still playing in Ralph Wilson Stadium.
Right.
And since that time, they were playing in Bills Stadium.
Yuck.
Funny story. The day I handed in the manuscript,
they changed the name.
They changed the name to Highmark. I had to call the publisher and say, hey, don't do anything with that. Let me give you a new one. So I had to go back and change like 5 or 6 chapters where Bill Stadium was mentioned. And
Highmark, double yuck. Question from Lone Wolf. Lone Wolf, thanks for being a part of the show. Did you ever get a chance to interview Joe DeLamalure? And if you did, why don't you tell us about it?
I did not, but I did do a book signing with Joe. And it was kind of funny because I did a book signing with Joe. He had done his book, Tales from the Sidelines. And Eddie Abramowski, who was the Bills' athletic trainer from 1960 all the way up to 1996, had written a book on Tale of the Tape. And so Barnes & Noble had put us all together on a panel, and I got top billing over Joe DeLamalure. And I'm sure it was a mistake, but I mean, he's a Hall of Famer, and I got the top billing, and they put me in the middle, and Joe was on one side, and Eddie was on the other. But he was great. He told me stories, and because most of the time we're just sitting there, waiting for people to come up. And there was a lot of downtime, and he was great.
Super good. That's awesome.
Really good
by the way, this guy, and for those that are in the chat and listening, Jeff Wagner is from the Buffalo Bills message board, Beast of the East. So he is an icon and a legend inside of Bills Mafia. But Jeff asked, I think you went to school with Jeff.
Yeah.
Joe Ferguson doesn't hurt his ankle in 1980. Is there a different ending to that season?
Yeah, they beat San Diego, definitely. I don't know how much farther they get than that, but they definitely beat San Diego. That was such a heroic, gutsy game that he played. If you can go back and watch the film on YouTube, and you just see him limping after every throw, getting knocked on his butt and getting back up. We talk about the toughness of Jim Kelly, but before him was Joe Ferguson. Joe Ferguson was tough as nails, and even though he got a bad rap about hanging his head and not being able to win the big one, his teammates adored him. They just thought he was a leader and just tough.
Are you on Twitter?
Am I?
Yeah.
No, I'm not.
Yeah, there was a Twitter thing that went around today. Just show me a picture of a random player in a jersey that doesn't make sense. So like Bruce Smith in the Redskins jersey was there. Thurman Thomas in the Dolphins jersey was there. And literally Ferguson in the Buccaneers jersey is one of those pictures. It's like, I have the football card and I'm like, every time I see it, I'm like, yuck. Like, ugh.
Well, I still remember going to the stadium and seeing Frank Reich come in as a starting quarterback for the New York Jets.
Right.
That was really weird.
That's funny. Well, ladies and gentlemen, you have been listening to the Overreaction Sports Podcast on the Buffalo Rumblings Podcast Network, brought to you by the Market Dominator. I'm your host, Joe Miller, the voice of the Overreaction Sports Podcast, here with my guest, Jeff Miller, author and Buffalo Bills historian. Jeff, do me a favor. Tell everybody where they can find you, what you got coming up. I mean, I know we just talked about the 2 books, but I don't know, social media, if people want to connect with you, ask you questions or whatever, how can they find you?
Yeah, I have an author page on Facebook, Jeffrey J. Miller, and I interact all the time with people who are subscribing or who join. I don't know if they're fans so much as they are friends, but I really enjoy the give and take. Jeff, the guy who was just on, is a good friend. I have 2 books coming out. The Relics book should be out in June, at the end of June.
Nice.
And we're really excited about that. We're hoping to have a big reception at the Historical Museum here in Buffalo when that comes out. And then the 100 Things book should be out in September. And other than that, I'm going to be speaking at the Pro Football Hall of Fame in Canton in June. Also, I'm going to be part of a panel that's going to be speaking about the founding of the NFL. So that's kind of exciting, being invited to speak, at the Mecca.
Yeah.
So, there's some exciting stuff coming down the pike.
Awesome. Well, Jeff, thanks so much for being a part of the show. I appreciate it.
Enjoyed it.
Yeah, on behalf of myself, Bills Mafia, and the Buffalo Rumblings Network. The Buffalo Rumblings Network is probably something you should get connected with because it's full of all kinds of. I mean, it's SB Nation. It's Sports Blog Nation. So if you're interested in doing any type of just like sideline blog stuff, that's probably the place to get connected. But appreciate the time. We're going to let everybody go. With that, you've been watching, as I said, the Overreaction Sports Podcast on the Buffalo Rumblings Podcast Network. My name is Joe Miller. You can find me on Twitter at Joe Miller Wired, and with the one guarantee that I always have: if you follow me, I will absolutely follow you back, and I will not unfollow you unless you tweet porn. So as long as you're not tweeting porn, we're good to go. It's a true story. But follow me if you get a chance. I love the interaction, love the conversation. Loved this show. Super compelling information, content was great. Jeff, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, dude. Just give me a Go Bills.
Go Bills.
Go Bills. We'll see you guys next time.
Oh.